My coworker thinks I was groomed. I think I was just being a reckless, stupid kid, and that I'm lucky I didn't get myself in a worse predicament. I guess I could say I chalked it up to being a sheltered, wild child who got a little too wild. This also happened many years ago now. When I graduated high school, I was almost 19. I grew up in a strict Catholic home with extremely strict, edging on abusive and definitely controlling parents. They are the kind that likes their kids to live the lives they want for them. It was a job that my parents had been training me to be in my whole life and structured my academic career around with not a single care as to what I wanted. My senior year of high school, I was working 2 part-time jobs, going to high school, going to a trade school on Saturdays, and still fitting in church on Sundays. Basically on the go from 6 a.m. 10 p.m. 7 days a week, and I would get into massive trouble if I didn't call my jobs every day and see if they needed me to come in after school and on the weekends. They would check my call logs and the length of the call to ensure that I was actually making the calls, and on the weekends would force me to make the calls in front of them. Punishment was usually physical. Yeah, my parents spanked me up until I was 18, or they would take away my driving privileges or take away my phone for months at a time. Yes, someone did call CPS on my parents, I don't know who, but I think it was my best friend's mom. But after CPS left the house, I was slapped so hard across the face I fell backwards with the chair I was sitting in going with me. CPS never came back after that initial visit, and no one dared to call them again after finding out what happened in fear that my parents would have done worse if it happened again. Even when I was sick, I was forced to go to work, and I would get in trouble if I got sent home until my parents would call my bosses and ask them if they sent me home or if I asked to be sent home. Thankfully, my bosses caught on to what was going on and would give me a break sometimes and say they didn't need me. One boss also tried to help me find an apartment, but my parents found out and threw a fit because they didn't pick it, so they won't approve it. I did eventually move out just before I turned 19 after my mom and I got into an argument about me breaking up with my boyfriend of 10 Emmett at the time. He was 24 and in a lot of legal trouble, but pretty wealthy, so my mother thought he was great for me. So she kicked me out of the house, and I stayed with my best friend for a couple of months until I could get an apartment. I also quit one of my jobs during that time to pick up hours at my main job. Then I lost my job shortly after moving into my new apartment due to financial issues in the company I worked for after new management came in and redid all the books. I was really lost after that, wondering what was I supposed to do with my life. My parents turned their backs on me, completely saying they would not talk to me until I found a respectable job. Working in retail and being a marketing manager for an insurance company weren't good enough for them, I guess. I went into a deep spiral of depression. And I guess I started looking for a filler to replace everything I had lost. I found it in my older friends that I worked with at my retail job. These people were between 29 to 35 years old. They would take me with them to parties, and we would all get super drunk and super high. I would often be given drinks that were too strong for me, and I think a couple of times I may have even been drugged. I figured this out with my therapist when we talked about this part of my life. I would often wake up with one of 2 guys I didn't really know from the group and not remember how I got there or what happened, and they were much older than me. I knew how old they were after a while. 31 David and 32 Tom, fake names, because I asked them, and surprisingly, they were honest about it. This went on for a while until the David and I kind of started going steady. I guess I fell for him and IDK what I was to him. He would come over to my apartment sometimes to stay the night, and I would stay at his place, sometimes too. We would get drunk and do a lot of adult things and fall asleep. Sometimes we would watch movies or play video games together. And sometimes other guys from the group would try and hang out with us, and David would let them. He would get pretty upset, though, if anyone else got too close to me. Then after a couple of months, David started to get really possessive and wouldn't let anyone near me. I was always encouraged to drink and pressured to smoke weed, and sometimes they were a little scary about it. And I was scared to be abandoned again and fearful. They would start treating me like my parents, so I would do it. Then one day someone slipped up and let it out to the group that both David and Tom were actually still married. They were presenting themselves as divorced men with no children, and had children that they were not allowed to see. They, David and Tom and the rest of the group, rallied up against her and kicked her out of the group. But she wouldn't leave the house without me. So being scared and not understanding what was going on and confused about being lied to like that, I went with her against David's demands. He was honestly scaring me a little bit with how mad he was getting over the fact that I was leaving with her. She took me back home. I had ridden with David over there to save gas, and she told me to never hang out with them again and to never see David or Tom again. She could tell there was trouble brewing with those two and decided to take a stand and protect me. So I blocked them, and they never did come bother me again. I don't think I mentioned that Tom and David are both Afghanistan war veterans who were sent home after an IED hit their convoy and injured them both. David was hurt a lot worse than Tom and lost a few really close friends that day. She was concerned that they were suffering from PTSD and that things were about to get bad with them. They had both been home from overseas and discharged from the military for about 3 years at that point. She was right about David, at least. He ended up having a psychotic breakdown a few weeks later and ended up taking his own life. A small part of me feels guilty and responsible for his breakdown, but now I know I couldn't have saved him and I would have probably been in more danger if I had stuck around. As for Tom, I don't know what he's up to now. I don't care to know, especially looking back on that whole situation now that I have grown up. I am not sure how I let myself get into that situation, or if I would have been okay if that girl hadn't gotten me out of there. Most of them have not changed much. Me, on the other hand, I'm doing all right now. I sometimes still have issues with feeling horrible about myself over it, and sometimes I worry people are using me like that again. I do still struggle with anxiety and guilt sometimes from that situation, especially if I feel I'm being used by someone. However, I have 4 beautiful children with my wonderful husband, and I live very far away from all of them now. I blocked all of them on social media per the advice of my therapist, and I think I am almost healed from most of my trauma. I acknowledge that I did get myself into that situation by being reckless, and I think the rebellious side of me that was tired of being oppressed by my parents loved getting the chance to be wild and free. My coworker thinks I was a young girl being taken advantage of by grown adults who should have known better than allow a young girl that age to be manipulated and used, and that it really wasn't my fault that this happened. Well, that's it, I think. So what do y'all think, case of grooming? Or just reckless, childish behavior?